A young black girl boards a plane with nothing but a book in her hand and wonder in her eyes. But when she takes the window seat she was assigned, a pilot's quiet prejudice turns a simple trip into a moment that stuns the entire cabin. What unfolds in the next hour exposes far more than poor judgment. It reveals what happens when power meets the wrong mother at the wrong time in front of the right people. Will justice soar or crash under the weight of silence? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about innocence, race, and the price of speaking up. Rosie Weaving had a habit of walking 5 steps ahead of her mother, even in places she'd never been before. At just 10 years old, she moved like she belonged in the world, like it had been built for her to explore. Her shoulders were small but square, and in her left hand she gripped a worn paperback copy of The Magician's Secret, the corners bent from too many reads. She didn't skip or bounce like other kids her age. Rosie floated, feet on the ground, mind somewhere above it. Her braids, neat and freshly done that morning, swung gently as she turned her head to scan the rows of gates at Ellis Hamilton International Airport. Terminal D buzzed around her, a constant blur of rolling luggage, TSA announcements, and muffled boarding calls. But Rosie didn't hear any of it. She was already 30,000 feet up in her head. Danielle, walking behind her, couldn't help but smile. She always let Rosie take the lead, even if it meant zigzagging through the terminal like a tourist. Let her lead, let her feel free. Danielle knew the world would try hard enough to convince her otherwise. "Gate 38, Danielle said, not loud, not soft, just enough for Rosie to hear. "I know," Rosie replied without looking back. "We're flying Freedom Air, Flight 807, Boeing 737. Danielle's smile didn't fade, but it grew heavier. Rosie had memorized the flight info 3 days ago and checked the seat map herself. Of course she had. That was her girl. Seat 14A, the window seat. That was the one Rosie picked when they booked the tickets. It wasn't random. Not for her. It was a promise. To herself, to the sky, to the stories she carried in that weathered book. She wanted to see the clouds melt below her like cotton candy on a stove. She wanted to press her forehead against the cold, curved glass and watch the world shrink beneath her. Danielle knew better than to question her daughter's attachment to that window. It was more than a seat. It was a small slice of magic. They approached the gate. Rosie slowed down now, finally letting her mom catch up. A tall man in a pilot's uniform passed by them without acknowledgement. White, with a clean-cut jaw and a practiced smile that didn't seem meant for anyone in particular. He walked like he owned something. Danielle noticed that. Rosie didn't. Not yet. The boarding process was smooth at first. Danielle scanned their passes and gave a polite thank you to the agent at the gate. Rosie held out her boarding pass like it was a badge of honor. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her excitement wasn't loud. It was quiet, rich, and full, like the way a violin hums in an empty room. They stepped onto the plane. The air was cooler inside. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold. Rosie led the way again, stopping at row 14, left side, by the window. She placed her book on the seat cushion, turned to her mom, and whispered, "I got it." Then, quiet rusp of the engines and the din of traffic, the doors open and open. Danielle nodded, placing their small carry-on in the overhead bin. She was sliding into 14B, next to Rosie, when a voice cut through the calm. "Excuse me." The tone made Danielle freeze. Not rude, not sharp, but something off. Rosie turned first. The pilot, the same one who had passed them at the gate, was standing in the aisle, looking down at Rosie like she'd wandered someplace she didn't belong. "The seat's reserved for unaccompanied minors," he said. We'll need her to move." Rosie blinked. "I'm with my mom." The man smiled. Thin, polite, professional. But Danielle saw it. That tiny flicker of something else in his eyes. "I understand. But that seat is often set aside for kids flying alone." The flight attendants may have made a mistake. Danielle spoke now. "We chose this seat. I booked it 3 weeks ago. It wasn't marked as reserved." He kept that same smile, as if he were trying to explain something obvious to someone difficult. "I understand, but it's usually policy." "No," Rosie said. The word was small, but it cut through the aisle. The passengers boarding behind them slowed down. A few turned their heads. "I want the window," Rosie added, quieter now. Danielle reached out gently and placed her hand on her daughter's arm. Not to silence her, just to say, "I'm here." "You're asking a 10-year-old girl sitting in her assigned seat to move because of a policy that isn't listed anywhere?" Danielle asked, keeping her tone smooth, unbothered. Her voice had years of law school in it, but it also had the restraint of a black mother who knew how fast a moment like this could spiral. The pilot's smile broke for the first time. "There's no need to get defensive," he said, straightening. "We're just trying to keep things organized." Danielle tilted her head, slow. "You walked past several rows of children, didn't ask them to move. Why is it this seat? Why is it this child?" Passengers were still boarding, but the air had changed. The quiet hum of motion and murmur turned brittle. The pilot's eyes dropped to Rosie again, then up to Danielle. "I'm the captain of this flight. I'm asking you respectfully to move to another row." "And I'm respectfully declining," Danielle said. "Unless you plan to delay this flight further, I suggest you let us sit." He didn't answer right away. His jaw moved slightly, teeth grinding just once, barely noticeable. Rosie sat perfectly still, but her fingers curled around her book. The pilot turned and walked away, brisk. No goodbye, no resolution. Just a silence that carried a weight. Danielle sat down beside Rosie, took a breath, and exhaled it slowly. "You okay?" Rosie nodded. "Why did he do that?" Danielle didn't answer right away. She stared straight ahead at the empty seat back in front of her. Then she said, "Because some people see what they expect to see, not what's actually there." Rosie turned to the window. Her fingers touched the small circle of glass, cool to the skin. She didn't speak again, not yet. A few rows back, a young man, a passenger who looked barely out of college, pulled out his phone. He hadn't liked the tone, hadn't liked the way the captain stood over them. He recorded it, quietly, just in case. The cabin crew moved on. The flight attendants passed through, offering practice smiles and hollow apologies. The captain remained in the cockpit, the engine whirred to life. Rosie stared out the window. Danielle reached over and took her hand. The plane began to taxi. Somewhere in the terminal, a call was being made. And above them, the clouds waited. Captain Todd Brenner stood just inside the cockpit doorway, watching the flight attendants perform their pre-departure checks with mechanical precision. He didn't speak, not yet. He simply stood with one hand resting against the edge of the doorframe, the other curled casually around his belt buckle. He wasn't a cruel man, or so he told himself. He believed in discipline, in standards, in things being where they were supposed to be, especially people. His gaze flicked over row 14 again. The girl was still there. Black. Young. Quiet, but defiant in that eerie way kids could be when they didn't know how small they were supposed to feel. He rubbed his jaw. Something about the mother, too. Her eyes, maybe. Not angry. Worse. Unbothered. That was what got under his skin. The quiet ones always did. They didn't yell, they didn't plead, they just stared at you like they'd already figured you out, and nothing you said could change it. He stepped back into the cockpit. "Passenger in 14A is non-compliant," he muttered to his co-pilot, a young guy named Rick who looked barely old enough to rent a car. but I handled it." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Everything good?" "Fine, just an attitude problem." Rick didn't push. He never did. Back in the cabin, the energy had shifted. The air wasn't tense, not quite, but something about it had cooled, like the temperature had dropped just enough for people to notice, even if they couldn't explain why. People kept glancing down the aisle toward row 14, some pretending not to, others making no effort to hide it. Rosie sat still, her book open on her lap, but unread. Her eyes didn't move across the page. She just stared down at the words like they were a puzzle she no longer knew how to solve. Danielle noticed. Of course she did. "You want to switch seats?" Danielle offered quietly. "I'll take the window this time." Rosie shook her head. Danielle let the silence sit a moment longer before leaning in. "Talk to me. Have recently looked at me like I was a mistake." Danielle felt the weight of that sentence land between them like a dropped brick. Not because it surprised her, but because it hadn't. She reached over, took Rosie's hand, and held it without a word. A few rows back, someone murmured something too soft to hear. A soft chuckle followed. Then another voice, not loud but audible, said, "You saw it, right?" A flight attendant approached with a forced smile. Her name tag read Rachel. She looked tired in the way people do when they've had to learn to smile through discomfort. "Can I offer you both something to drink before we take off?" she asked. Danielle smiled back, the way black women are taught to, measured, polite, just enough. "We're good, thank you." Rachel nodded. Her eyes flicked to Rosie, then to the seat. Her lips pressed together for half a second before she moved on. She hadn't said anything, but Danielle saw it. She'd noticed, and she'd filed it away. The plane pulled back from the gate. The safety demo began, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Rosie watched the runway through the small oval of glass, her reflection barely visible in the window. She liked that, seeing herself blend into the world rather than stick out from it. The engines roared louder now, and the plane began to move. The wheels bumped along the taxiway, then steadied, then bumped again. Rosie gripped the armrest, not out of fear, but anticipation. She liked this part, the moment right before liftoff, that pause between earth and sky, where everything felt like it could go either way. As they began to ascend, she pressed her forehead to the window, watching as the airport shrank beneath them, gates turning into dots, planes turning into toys, runways turning into lines on a map. She imagined her voice as a whisper, trailing behind the aircraft, curling through the clouds like ribbon. Danielle watched her daughter. Not the takeoff, not the ground below, just Rosie. Her eyes were wide, but not scared, just awake, alive. "Still mad?" Danielle asked gently. Rosie didn't look away from the window. "No." "Still thinking about it?" A pause. Then, "Yeah." Danielle nodded. "It's okay to feel both." Rosie tilted her head, resting it sideways against the pane. "Do people like him always get to decide?" "Yeah." "They think they do." "Yeah," Danielle said. "But they don't." Another flight attendant passed by, checking seatbelts. Her eyes lingered a moment on Danielle and Rosie but said nothing. Danielle noticed again. In the seat behind them, a man was quietly typing something on his phone, a caption, maybe, a draft tweet, or just a note so he wouldn't forget what he'd seen. The pilot hadn't yelled. He hadn't cursed. But the weight of his words, the positioning of his authority, it stuck with people. By the time they leveled out above the clouds, a few passengers had opened their phones to Wi-Fi. Someone already had the short clip from the boarding line. Not the whole thing, just enough. Just the way the pilot stood over them, the tone in his voice, the freeze frame of Rosie's face. The caption said, "Pilot just tried to kick a black kid out of her seat, but watch what happens next." It hadn't happened yet, but people were watching anyway. Danielle hadn't touched her phone yet. She didn't need to. She wasn't looking for approval, wasn't waiting for hashtags. She was waiting for something else. She pulled out a business card from her wallet. A name was handwritten on the back in blue ink. Someone she knew from law school, now working in aviation compliance. Rosie had returned to her book by now, her finger tracing the edge of a paragraph slowly, silently. Danielle looked out her own window now, opposite side of the aisle. The clouds were brilliant today, bright white and endless. Funny how something so soft could be so high. Back in the cockpit, Captain Brenner adjusted his seat and glanced at the flight readouts. Everything was routine. He didn't think about the girl in 14A anymore. Not really. Just another entitled passenger. They came in all ages now. He leaned back, cracked his knuckles, and exhaled. But the story had already left the plane. It was circling, just like them, higher and higher, above his head, out of his control. Captain Brenner didn't hear the click of the recording. He didn't notice the way passengers stiffened in their seats when he walked down the aisle again, nor the way a young man quickly angled his phone screen toward the wall as the pilot passed. He was too focused on reasserting control. He wasn't scheduled to leave the cockpit during this stretch of the flight, but he made a habit of checking the cabin now and then, especially when a situation didn't sit quite right. That child in 14A still sat in that seat like she owned it, like there hadn't been a direct request from the captain himself. Her mother had the nerve to speak for both of them, calmly but firmly, like she'd been waiting her whole life for a moment to push back and make it count. He hated that look on people. The quiet assurance, the kind that couldn't be shaken by uniforms or seniority. It was the same look his high school geometry teacher had given him when she told him he'd never be more than average. The same one a black mother gave him today in row 14 when she decided not to be impressed. He reached the galley, arms folded, nodding briefly to Rachel, the lead flight attendant. She looked up from the drinks cart and saw it in his face, that tension just beneath the surface. Rachel had worked with Captain Brenner before. She knew he liked things neat, liked passengers compliant, and liked it when the crew read his silence like scripture. "You need something, Captain?" she asked cautiously. He kept his voice low. "Is that girl still in 14A?" Rachel hesitated. "Yes, sir." He exhaled through his nose. "There's protocol about those seats. There's also protocol about confronting passengers during boarding, sir," Rachel said carefully. "Especially minors traveling with adults. She's with her mother, and their ticket has the seat assigned." Brenner gave her a long look, one eyebrow slightly raised. Rachel's posture stiffened. "I'm not trying to be difficult." "No," he said. "Just thorough." Rachel turned back to her cart, but her hands moved slower now. He took a few more steps forward, scanning the cabin, not looking for trouble, just confirmation. The girl was still there, all right, her braids neatly lined down her back, her head slightly tilted toward the window. She didn't look back at him, not once. The mother, Danielle, was reading something on her phone now, but even that looked intentional, like she wanted to be seen not paying attention to him, not intimidated, not moved. He hated that. In the row across the aisle, a woman gave him a tight, uneasy smile. He didn't return it. A young man 2 rows up kept glancing over his shoulder. The pilot clocked it, but said nothing. Back in his seat, the man with the phone had started typing again. Danielle felt his presence before she saw him. She didn't look up right away. She didn't need to. "Ma'am," Brenner said flatly. She looked up, but only slightly. "Captain, I want to be clear," he began. "I understand you believe your seat assignment is valid." "It is valid," Danielle replied. "Row 14A and 14B. We confirmed it when we booked." He nodded once, but it was the kind of nod meant to pause a conversation, not agree with it. Sometimes the system allows passengers to select seats without flagging them as priority or restricted, he said. That window seat is typically reserved for certain protocols involving unaccompanied minors or special needs children. It's about safety. Danielle leaned back slightly in her seat, arms crossed now. Not defensive, just done. You've had that conversation with every other parent and child in this cabin? Brenner's mouth twitched. Because I see at least 3 other kids sitting in window seats, she added. White kids. He blinked. Ma'am, don't make this about... It is about that, Danielle said, her voice still steady. Let me guess. No record of the seat being flagged. No formal policy listed on the ticket. No documentation. Just a rule you decided to enforce with us. Rosie had gone still again, her eyes focused on the clouds beyond the window, pretending not to hear. But Danielle knew she heard every word. Brenner glanced down the aisle. A few heads were turned. More eyes on them now. He looked back at Danielle. If we continue this conversation, I'll have to document it as a disturbance. Danielle raised an eyebrow. A disturbance? From a mother speaking to a pilot about her child's assigned seat? He didn't answer. I'm an attorney, she added. You can file your documentation. I'll file mine. Rosie turned slightly now, looking not at the captain but at her mother's profile, her posture, her calm, her refusal to shrink. Brenner stood there a second longer, jaw tight. He gave one last look at Rosie, then turned without a word and returned toward the cockpit. Danielle didn't breathe for 3 full seconds after he left. Not because she was scared, but because holding your breath made it easier to keep your voice even. Rosie finally looked at her. You didn't yell. Danielle looked back, smiling faintly. Wouldn't have mattered. Would it have felt better? Danielle gave a small laugh. Maybe, but it's not about feeling better. It's about staying in control. That's how you win. Rosie nodded, absorbing it. Farther down the cabin, Rachel was watching from the galley. She hadn't missed a second of it. She stepped forward now, coming quietly to their row and kneeling slightly beside Danielle's seat. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. You're not wrong. Danielle gave her a long, thoughtful look. Are you going to file a report? Rachel nodded once. Already started writing it in my head. Good, Danielle said. Make sure it's the truth. Rachel stood, adjusted her blazer, and moved on. The man with the phone hit upload. It wasn't a long clip, just 38 seconds. Danielle's calm voice, the captain's attempt at control, Rosie's stillness. The way the power shifted mid-sentence. The title. This pilot tried the wrong mother. And just like that, 14A became the most watched seat on the internet. The aisle never seemed quiet again after the pilot walked away. Whispers took up space where silence used to live. Light as static at first, barely there, conversations that built momentum like a storm behind a closed door. No one spoke loudly. They didn't need to. The tension was already thick, buzzing through recycled air, caught in the overhead lights, vibrating through tray tables and seat cushions. Passengers weren't sure what they had just witnessed, but they knew enough. Knew what it looked like, knew how it felt. That man, in his polished uniform and polished tone, had tried to shrink a little girl like she was a nuisance, like she had wandered into first class without a ticket, and her mother hadn't flinched. Rosie sat exactly where she had before in 14A, her forehead now lightly pressed against the cool window again, like nothing had happened. But she wasn't looking at the clouds anymore. She was watching her own reflection in the glass, watching how still she looked, wondering if stillness could make her disappear or if it would just make people notice her more. Danielle had gone back to scrolling through her phone, her thumb slowly moving down the screen. But she wasn't reading. She was breathing, keeping her face composed. In her mind, she was replaying everything. The captain's face, the weight behind his words, the way the other passengers shifted in their seats like they weren't sure whether to intervene or hide. 12 rows behind them, a college-aged passenger named Tyler James stared at the video he'd just uploaded to TikTok. No hashtags, no tags, just raw footage, 38 seconds long. He hadn't expected it to explode, but before he could even put his phone down, the views ticked upward. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. A few rows in front of Rosie, a woman in a gray blazer leaned across the aisle to whisper to her seatmate. She handled that better than I would have. Her seatmate nodded, eyes forward, pretending not to listen while catching every word. That little girl didn't even say anything. She just looked at him, like she knew better. Do you think she was recording? I don't know. I saw some guy near the back filming. Their conversation wasn't unusual. It was everywhere now, in low voices, behind raised magazines, above cracked open laptops. So yeah, didn't even try to hide it. I mean, the mom stayed calm, but you could feel it. I would have lost my job yelling at him. Danielle noticed it, the same way you notice when a room changes temperature. Not loud enough to be a disruption, but present enough to be a warning. Attention. Attention meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant pressure. And pressure, she knew from the courtroom, had a way of making truths rise to the surface. Rachel came back again. She didn't kneel this time, didn't whisper. She simply offered Rosie a ginger ale with a small napkin beneath it. Rosie turned to her, hesitated, then took it with both hands. "Thank you," Rosie said. Rachel smiled. "You're welcome, sweetheart." She turned to Danielle and gave a small nod. "We're about halfway to D.C. Let me know if either of you need anything else." Danielle gave the smallest nod in return. "Thank you." Rachel moved on, but her presence lingered like the echo of something kind. Rosie took a sip, the carbonation tickling her nose, then tucked the cup into her tray's index. "I'm not scared," she said, not looking at Danielle. "I know," Danielle replied, "that I don't like how it feels when everyone stares." Danielle exhaled slowly. "They're not staring at you. They're staring at what they just learned about him." Rosie nodded, still looking out the window. "He didn't even say sorry." "No," Danielle said. "He didn't." Rosie's brow furrowed. "Is he going to get in trouble?" Danielle didn't answer right away. "Maybe, maybe not." "That's not fair." "No," she agreed. "But we're not done yet." Rosie sat quietly after that, but her hands moved. She flipped open her book again, this time reading aloud under her breath, barely audible but steady, almost like casting a spell that kept the rest of the plane away. Back in row 26, Tyler's phone buzzed, another notification. His video had hit 92,000 views in 40 minutes. He refreshed the app, now 100,000. Comments poured in. Most were furious. Some asked for the airline, others wanted names. One comment read, "They'd better hope that Mother doesn't press this further." Another, "I hope she's a lawyer," she sounded like one. And then, "That pilot's not ready for what's coming." Tyler clicked into his DMs. A reporter had messaged him already. News travels fast when people recognize the signs, when they can feel the injustice in their bones and smell the gasoline already poured on the ground. Near the front of the plane, a middle-aged couple whispered over a shared Kindle. "It's going viral," the man said quietly. "Someone filmed it." The woman blinked. "Already?" "Of course. People see something like that, they don't forget it." "But it was so fast," she said. He nodded. "That's the part that makes it worse. It wasn't loud, it was just obvious." Danielle's phone buzzed once. Then again. She turned the brightness down, angled the screen low, and read the preview. "Saw the video. Please call me when you land. We need to talk." This is already news. It was from her friend Nicole, a civil rights journalist who worked with a major network. Danielle didn't reply. She looked at her daughter, who was now quietly mouthing dialogue from her book, her lips moving in rhythm with a world no one else could see. Somewhere near row 18, a baby cried. 2 people groaned at the same time. A flight attendant passed with a plastic bag full of wrappers. Normal resumed. Almost. At least it now. There was a current running beneath the rows. A current with a camera, a timestamp, and 38 seconds of truth. The story was airborne now. And just like this plane, it wasn't coming down easy. Danielle Weaving never raised her voice, not in the courtroom, not in a boardroom, and certainly not at 36,000 feet. Her power didn't come from volume, it came from presence. The kind of presence that made people instinctively lower theirs. The kind that made you second-guess your assumptions. She sat in 14B like the seat was designed for her posture, like the air around her bent itself to accommodate her restraint. Her fingers were still, but her mind wasn't. She had already mentally drafted a complaint, 2 versions of a statement, and a summary of the interaction with the pilot. Her legal mind worked like gears in a watch, every tick intentional, every movement backed by precedent. She had watched the cabin change around her, watched the quiet whispers ripple into full-blown tension that no turbulence could mask. Rosie next to her had gone back to her book, reading under her breath. But Danielle saw her blink more often. She wasn't reading, not really. She was absorbing, processing, replaying. Danielle turned slightly toward her. "You hungry?" Rosie shook her head without looking up. "You sure? I've got those crackers you like." "No, thanks." Danielle didn't push. She knew the quiet wasn't about food. She slid her bag out from beneath the seat in front of her and unzipped it slowly, deliberately. She pulled out a notebook, thick with worn edges and paper tabs poking from the sides. Inside were lined pages, some filled with court notes, others with sketches Rosie had doodled during long waits at her mother's office. She flipped to a blank page and wrote a name at the top. Captain Todd Brenner. Below it, she started jotting notes, each line clean and purposeful, no emotion, just facts. Rosie glanced sideways. "You gonna write him up?" "I'm gonna write everything up," Danielle said without looking away from the page. "Will he get fired?" "I don't know." "Do you want him to be?" Danielle paused her pen. Then, finally, "I want him to understand." Rosie was quiet for a moment. "What if he doesn't?" Danielle looked up. "Then I'll make sure the people who do understand get to make the decisions next." A flight attendant passed by again. Rachel, moving slower now, checking for trash, but more so checking the temperature of the cabin. She'd felt the shift, too. There was no more small talk in the rows, only hushed exchanges. Glances toward 14A and B, occasional glances toward the cockpit door. Rachel stopped at their row and leaned slightly, offering a smile. "Everything all right?" Danielle nodded. "We're okay, thank you." Rachel lingered, uncertain whether to say more, then decided to. "Just so you know, we're documenting everything internally. You don't have to prove what happened." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "I don't. But I will anyway." Rachel smiled faintly, gave a nod, and moved on. Danielle returned to her notes. She outlined the exact words used, the tone, the presence, the implication. She knew what bias sounded like when it wore a tie, knew how it presented itself as procedure or protocol or concern. That's how it always slipped past HR departments and compliance officers, through the cracks created by polite language and plausible deniability. She glanced at Rosie again, still clutching her book like a life raft. "I'm proud of you," Danielle said. Rosie looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For sitting there and not letting him take your seat." "I didn't know what else to do." "You didn't need to do anything else," Danielle said. That's the point. That seat was yours. It still is. Rosie blinked. I thought maybe he was right for a second. Danielle reached over and gently adjusted the collar of Rosie's shirt. That's how it works. They make you doubt it. Then they count on you giving up. Rosie nodded slowly. A few rows ahead, a woman with graying hair slipped her phone out of her purse and scrolled. She turned to her husband and whispered, "This video. It's everywhere now." "How bad is it?" "She's trending." "Who?" "The mom. The little girl, too. Their faces are everywhere." Danielle's phone buzzed again. "Nicolesh. You've already gone viral. It's past 500K views. News cycle will pick it up before you land." She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she opened a new tab and searched the airline's corporate structure. She found the VP of Public Relations, the Senior Manager of Passenger Experience, and a compliance contact at the FAA. She copied the information down in her notebook beneath the captain's name. Danielle wasn't interested in rage. Rage made people tune out. She wanted pressure, precision, results. That's how systems changed. Not with screaming matches, but with carefully executed responses that left no room for rebuttal. The intercom chimed. Captain Brenner's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly into Washington, D.C. Local time is 2:27 p.m. Skies are clear. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." His voice was clean, controlled, not a hint of tension in it. That kind of tone came from experience, from years of knowing how to sound calm even when the cabin was anything but. But Danielle heard it, the extra beat between his words, the subtle pause where there hadn't been one before. She closed her notebook and slid it back into her bag. "We're almost there," she said to Rosie. "Do we tell Grandma what happened?" Danielle smiled faintly. "You think she won't already know?" Rosie grinned. "She watches the news more than anybody." The seatbelt sign dinged. People sat up straighter. Tray tables snapped shut. But the usual pre-landing murmur was absent. Instead, the air was taut with anticipation. As if the moment the wheels hit the ground, something else would take off. Danielle rested her hand over Rosie's and gave it a light squeeze. "Whatever happens after we land," she said, "just remember, you never did anything wrong." Rosie nodded. Her eyes were sharp again, awake, no longer hiding behind stillness. She looked out the window. The clouds were thinning now, revealing the city below, the buildings small and scattered, the streets threading together like stitched seams on a worn fabric. Danielle sat back in her seat and closed her eyes for just a second. She'd prepared her entire life for moments like this. Quiet fire, careful strength, calm that burned hotter than outrage. Because if the world wanted to misunderstand her daughter, they'd have to go through her first. The plane rolled to a stop at Gate 27, the soft clunk of the wheels locking in place followed by a familiar double ding. Passengers began shifting in their seats, pulling backpacks from under the chairs, and stretching stiff necks that had held too much tension for too long. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a click, and overhead bins creaked open almost immediately. But in row 14, neither Rosie nor Danielle moved. Danielle's phone buzzed again. She finally unlocked it. Text after text. Missed calls. Mentions from names she hadn't heard from in years. Attorneys, colleagues. Even a woman she went to law school with who now worked in DC media had sent a single line. "Danielle, you're everywhere." Rosie sat quietly, gripping her book now like it was armor. Her eyes scanned the crowd ahead, watching as people funneled into the aisle. The air was thick with that post-landing urgency. Everyone wanting to move, to escape, to breathe free of the pressure cooker tube they'd shared for hours. "You okay?" Danielle asked, brushing a hand over Rosie's shoulder. Rosie nodded, but her voice was soft. "Why is everyone looking at us again?" Session. Danielle followed her gaze. People weren't being obvious, but they were definitely stealing glances. Some smiled gently, others looked away the second their eyes met Danielle's. A man across the aisle nodded once. A woman with a toddler mouthed, "Thank you." "It's not just us they're looking at," Danielle said calmly. "It's what we did. Or didn't do. They're wondering if they would have stayed in the seat." Rosie tilted her head. "Would they?" "Some," Danielle said. "Most wouldn't have." Rosie blinked slowly. "But it was just a seat." Danielle gave a soft smile. "It was never just a seat." Rachel, the flight attendant, appeared beside them, her voice low. "They're asking the passengers in the first 10 rows to disembark first," she said. "But you're free to stay seated as long as you need." Danielle looked up at her. "You okay?" Rachel hesitated. "I've filed 2 reports already. The union will see them by morning." Danielle's voice lowered. "I'll be submitting mine before we even hit baggage claim." Rachel nodded with something close to admiration. "Good." They waited as the crowd moved. More glances, more nods. Tyler, the college kid who'd filmed the video, passed by and gave Danielle a sheepish look, unsure if he should say anything. Danielle met his eyes, then gave him the smallest nod. Approval, permission, maybe even thanks. He seemed to exhale for the first time all flight. When the cabin had mostly emptied, Danielle rose and pulled her bag from the overhead bin. Rosie stood too, tucking her book into her small backpack. As they stepped into the jet bridge, the cooler air hit their faces like a breath of fresh truth. Danielle pulled her phone from her coat pocket and tapped the number she hadn't used in over a year. The call rang twice. A woman's voice answered, clipped and professional. "Maya Townsend." "It's Danielle." A pause. Then, "Danielle Weaving? Oh my God, what did he do?" Danielle chuckled softly, not out of humor but out of recognition. "You already know. I've seen the video. I've already had 3 reporters reach out. Are you okay? Is Rosie okay?" Danielle glanced at her daughter beside her, walking just a step ahead like she always did. "Where's steady?" Danielle replied. "Good," Maya said. "Because this isn't going away. It's climbing past 2 million views. They already ID'd the airline and the pilot's name is out there. There's a clip circulating from a previous incident, too. You may not be the first." Danielle's jaw clenched just slightly. "That matters." It does," Maya agreed. "Do you want press?" "Eventually." "Legal?" "Definitely. I have someone in aviation ethics who can help." Danielle stopped near a bench at the side of the gate and motioned for Rosie to sit. Rosie dropped her bag and climbed up onto the vinyl seat, pulling out a granola bar without being asked. "I'm drafting a formal complaint for the airline," Danielle said. "Also for the FAA. This wasn't a mistake, it was targeted. He scanned that cabin and picked her." "You want to do it quietly?" Maya asked. "Or loud?" Danielle looked down at her daughter, at the way Rosie unwrapped her snack slowly, carefully, like she didn't want to crumble it, like she didn't want to crumble at all. "Loud," Danielle said, "but strategic." Maya's voice shifted instantly. "Then let's start with the facts. What seat were you assigned?" 14A and 14B. "Paper trail?" "Got the receipts in my email. Time-stamped. I screenshotted them on the flight." "Good." "That's your anchor. Did anyone else speak to you about the seat?" "No. Not until the pilot approached us." "Did the crew back him up?" "No. One even apologized." Maya exhaled. "Then you've got the crew's silence working in your favor. I'll coordinate with legal. Can I use your name?" "Use my name," Danielle said. "And hers." There was a pause. "You sure?" Maya asked softly. Danielle turned toward Rosie. The little girl was leaning back now, feet swinging, watching the planes on the tarmac taxi into the sunset. She didn't back down. Danielle said, "Her name belongs in this." Maya's voice warmed. "Then we'll make sure it stays there for the right reasons." They hung up. Danielle tucked the phone back into her coat and joined Rosie on the bench. She sat close, shoulder to shoulder, letting the quiet settle between them. Rosie turned. "Was that about the video?" Danielle nodded. "Yes." "Are you mad it got posted?" Danielle smiled. "No. People should see what happened." Rosie bit her lip. "Even the scary part?" "Especially the scary part." Rosie looked thoughtful. "I think I was more mad than scared." Danielle brushed a braid from her daughter's forehead. "That's okay, too." They sat like that for a moment, two bodies still in a world that wouldn't stop moving around them. Inside the terminal, passengers continued walking past. Some glanced, some smiled. One even stopped and offered Danielle her business card. "I'm with the Department of Transportation," she said. "If you need anything, support, documentation, just email me." Danielle took the card without hesitation. Rosie, watching, whispered, "Mom?" "Yeah." "Does it mean something when all these people help?" Danielle looked around at the strangers who had, in quiet ways, started to orbit them. "It means they saw you," she said. Rosie's eyes lit up, just barely. "Do you want to call Grandma now?" Danielle asked. Rosie smiled. "Can I tell her everything?" Danielle reached for her phone again. Every single word. By the time Rosie and Danielle reached baggage claim, the video had already crossed 4 million views. Tyler James, the college student who filmed it, hadn't even expected it to take off that fast. He'd posted videos before, little commentaries, funny moments at airports, even a time he caught a fight over an armrest. But nothing ever really moved like this. He refreshed his feed again, mouth open as the view count blinked past 4.3 million. Dozens of duets, shares piling into the hundreds of thousands, comment sections overflowing, and in almost every one, a name started appearing. Rosie Weaving. There was something about her face. Not crying, not yelling, just being. The stillness of her small frame in that seat, surrounded by the weight of an adult man's authority, spoke louder than outrage ever could. Tyler read the top comment aloud under his breath. "This girl just wanted a window seat. That's it. And look at what power tried to do to her." As Rosie and Danielle waited for their suitcase to slide down the carousel, a woman holding a tablet approached. She looked official, but not cold. Her blazer had a Freedom Air logo stitched near the breast pocket, but the concern in her eyes wasn't stitched into her uniform. It was real. "Mrs. Weaving?" she asked cautiously. Danielle turned. "Yes?" The woman extended a hand. "Linda Prescott. I'm the Regional Customer Experience Supervisor for Freedom Air. I'd like to sincerely apologize for what happened on board today." Danielle didn't shake her hand. Not out of rudeness, just clarity. "You saw the video?" she asked. Linda nodded. "We all have." Rosie looked up at the woman. Danielle placed a hand gently on her back. Linda tried to maintain composure. "We're investigating internally. I want you to know this isn't how we train our pilots, and it's not reflective of our values as a company." Danielle finally spoke, carefully. "Then explain why it happened." Linda's throat tightened. "We're not prepared to make public statements about Captain Brenner's behavior until a full review has been conducted. But I assure you, it's being treated seriously." "You didn't treat it seriously while we were still in the air," Danielle said. "Your pilot made a decision based on an assumption, and when he was wrong, he doubled down on authority. He didn't apologize. He didn't correct himself. He walked away like we were the problem." "I understand how it looked." "It didn't just look like something, it was something." Linda nodded slowly. "May I at least offer Rosie a travel voucher as a gesture of goodwill?" Rosie looked at her mother, confused. Danielle looked back at Linda. "My daughter doesn't need a voucher. She needs dignity. And your airline let a grown man try to take that from her in front of hundreds of strangers." Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. She nodded, took a step back, and said, "We'll be in touch, with a formal statement and, hopefully, with action." Danielle gave no promise of engagement. She simply turned back to the carousel. Rosie's pink suitcase came around the corner like it had been untouched by any of it. Danielle pulled it down, handed it to her daughter, and they began walking toward the exit. A man with a press badge was waiting near the doors. When he stepped forward, Danielle raised a hand before he could speak. "Not right now." He stepped back. Another reporter was waiting outside, camera phone already raised. "Miss Weaving, can we just get a few words?" Danielle shook her head. "No interviews, not yet." She didn't shield Rosie's face, didn't rush her forward. She walked at a steady, proud pace, letting every camera lens see them clearly. This wasn't a scandal, it was a mirror, and everyone who watched would have to decide what they saw. That night, Rosie sat on her grandmother's couch, feet tucked under her, as the evening news opened with a still image of her face beside a bold headline. "Pilot confronts 10-year-old over-assigned seat. Mother's calm response sparks national debate." Her grandmother, Martha, clutched the arm of the chair so hard her knuckles turned pale. "They did not," she whispered. "They did," Rosie said quietly. Martha turned to Danielle. "You let her stay in that seat?" Danielle nodded. "Good," Martha said. "Damn right." Rosie's eyes flicked back to the TV. The segment cut to the video. 38 seconds of tension, of voices pitched low but sharp, of her mother's unshaken words. Danielle stood behind the couch, arms folded. She didn't need to re-watch it. She could hear every word in her head already. A panel of commentators had been brought in. Aviation experts, educators, and a former airline PR director. "It's not about a seat," one of them said. "It's about control." "It's about race," another added. "Let's not pretend this would have happened if she was blonde and blue-eyed." "Honestly, it's about power. The captain had it, and he used it on the most vulnerable person in the room." Rosie's fingers tightened around the remote. "Am I supposed to be famous now?" she asked softly. Danielle leaned forward and kissed the top of her head. "You're supposed to be heard," she said. "That's all." Rosie nodded slowly. Her book lay open beside her, untouched. The fantasy world she once used to escape didn't feel far enough anymore. A real world, this moment, this name, this face, was louder than any dragon or spell. And somewhere, across the country, on devices in hands of strangers from cities she'd never seen, her story was still playing, 38 seconds at a time. Captain Todd Brenner didn't say a word during the debriefing. He sat in the small windowless room with his arms crossed, jaw tight, the kind of silence that begged to be interpreted as strength, but came off more like stubbornness. The regional flight director across from him shifted in his seat for the third time. The HR liaison next to him, clipboard balanced on one knee, tapped her pen gently against her notepad. Waiting. "You've seen the footage, Captain?" the director finally asked. Todd gave a single nod, slow and measured. "I've seen it." "And your thoughts?" Another pause. Todd shrugged. "It's being blown out of proportion." The HR liaison wrote something down immediately. The director leaned forward. "So you're saying..." "A nationwide viral incident, 4 million views in 24 hours, escalating coverage across every major network, is exaggerated?" The owner said, "It's exaggerated. I asked a child to move because of a seat designation that I understood to be reserved for special accommodations," Todd replied, voice low and clipped. "I was following protocol. Protocol that doesn't exist in our official training manuals. the HR rep said, not looking up. Todd's jaw twitched. It's customary. Not policy, the director said. And the problem isn't just what you said, it's who you said it to, and how you did it. She had attitude, Todd said. The HR rep's pen froze. A 10-year-old girl? Shh, had that look, Todd muttered, like she knew she could get away with anything. The medical director said. Was a child, sitting quietly in her assigned seat. And her mother didn't raise her voice, she didn't threaten, she didn't even use your name. She just didn't back down. He challenged my authority, Todd snapped. The silence that followed was brutal. He exercised her rights. The HR rep corrected. And she did it calmly. You escalated the situation. You didn't de-escalate it. And now the airline has a firestorm on its hands because a child was treated like a problem before she even opened her mouth. Todd folded his arms tighter. This is political. No, Captain, the director said. It's personal. You made it that way. You saw a black child in a window seat and assumed she didn't belong there. He didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, but because somewhere deep down he didn't know how to argue with the truth without exposing more of it. Across the city, Rosie Weaving sat in a glass conference room downtown, surrounded by legal pads, laptops, and cups of coffee that had gone cold from being ignored. Her legal counsel sat on one side, Maya Townsend on the other, and at the center of the table sat a folder, thin but packed with heat. Freedom Air had sent a statement to the press the night before. It was generic, polite, void of accountability. We are reviewing the incident on Flight 807 and take all reports of passenger discomfort seriously. The safety and dignity of our passengers is our top priority. No mention of the captain, no apology, no direct address to Rosie. They're trying to wait it out, Maya said, scrolling through the airline's latest press release. Let the news cycle turn over. Let something else trend. Let people forget. They won't forget, Danielle said. Maya nodded. Not yet. But this is the window. You want to force their hand? You release a formal demand today. Danielle leaned forward, folding her hands. We've got the receipts? Her counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Jeanette, slid a document across the table. Email confirmation of the seat assignment, passenger manifest, statement from the flight attendant, and now 3 separate witness accounts from passengers offering to testify on Rosie's behalf, plus Tyler's video. Danielle looked down at the papers. It didn't look like much, sitting there on plain printer paper, but it was everything. It was proof. It was the framework of truth. It was what Rosie didn't have to carry alone anymore. We go public, Danielle said, tomorrow morning. Maya nodded. We'll issue a demand for a public apology, retraining for all crew members on implicit bias, and a temporary grounding of Captain Branner pending further review. Danielle paused. No firing? That's up to them, Jeanette said. But we don't open with that. We show them what fairness looks like before they get taught what a lawsuit feels like. Danielle let out a long breath. I haven't told Rosie yet, she admitted. I don't want her thinking this is about revenge. It's not, Maya said. It's about the next kid who sits in that same seat. That night, Danielle found Rosie in the backyard at Grandma Martha's, lying on an old picnic blanket, her gaze fixed on the stars. Building the overlook vividly. They look like clouds from up here, Rosie said. Danielle sat down beside her. No, they don't. Rosie turned her head. Did you talk to the airline people? Danielle nodded. They're listening now. A lot of people are. Rosie frowned. Are they going to say sorry? Danielle hesitated. They haven't yet. Might not. Because some people think silence protects them. Rosie looked back up at the sky. You told me the truth always comes out. "It does," Danielle said softly. "But sometimes we have to help it along." Rosie didn't answer. She just reached for her mother's hand and held it quietly, as if that alone could tilt the universe closer to justice. Inside the house, the evening news flickered on the living room TV. A new headline now: Freedom Air faces backlash for racial profiling incident on Flight 807. Passenger's lawyer files formal demands. And just below it, a still frame of Rosie's face. Wide-eyed, quiet, and unmistakably unafraid. Captain Brenner wouldn't say her name, but the world already had. Rosie hadn't asked for the attention, and she didn't fully understand the gravity of it. Not yet. She only knew that people were talking about her. People she didn't know, teachers, nurses, journalists, children who looked like her, and some who didn't. They were writing her name, making art of her face, even adding her to hashtags. She didn't understand. One girl, maybe 12 or 13, had made a TikTok of herself sitting in a window seat with the caption, "For Rosie." "We don't move anymore." Danielle scrolled through the flood of posts while Rosie sat across from her at the kitchen table, chewing on her pencil and pretending to do homework. The truth was, her math book was open, but her mind wasn't in it. Her body was here. Her spirit was still on that plane. Danielle turned her phone face down. "Your teacher called today?" she said gently. Rosie didn't look up. "I didn't do anything." He said, "You've been quiet." Rosie shrugged. "They all keep asking me about the video." Danielle nodded. "And you don't want to talk about it?" Rosie's voice was low. "I don't know what to say." Danielle stood and walked around the table, sitting beside her. "You don't have to say anything, Rosie. That video wasn't about what you said. It was about how you stayed." "I didn't feel brave," Rosie said. "You don't have to feel brave to be brave," Danielle whispered. "You just have to stay standing, or sitting, when someone tries to push you out." Rosie's eyes dropped to her notebook, the pencil twirling between her fingers. "Are we going to court?" Danielle smiled faintly. "Maybe. Right now we're just asking them to do the right thing." "But what if they don't?" Danielle looked at her daughter. "Then we show them we're not going anywhere." That same morning, a second statement from Freedom Air landed in inboxes across the country. It was longer than the first, slightly more human, but it still didn't say the most important thing. No admission, no apology, not even Rosie's name. It read like it had been written by a lawyer in a windowless office, far removed from emotion. Freedom Air values all passengers and remains committed to an equitable and inclusive flying experience. We are actively reviewing the recent situation on Flight 807 and have begun a comprehensive internal investigation. We ask for patience as we continue to gather facts and review protocols. Danielle's team picked it apart line by line. It was full of noise, hollow with distance. "They're buying time," Maya said during a call that afternoon. "Waiting to see if the public loses steam. They think we'll move on." Danielle's response was immediate. "Then we won't let them." Maya grinned. "Then it's time." The next morning, Danielle gave her first public statement. She stood outside a small legal aid center in downtown D.C., the courthouse spire rising behind her like a reminder of where stories like these were supposed to end. Rosie wasn't there. She didn't need to be. "I want to make something clear," Danielle said into the microphones. "This is not just about a pilot. This is not just about a seat. This is about the hundreds of small ways children like my daughter are told they don't belong, even when they do, and how quickly authority moves to silence them when they dare to sit in their rightful place." Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled. A few people watching even clapped. Not loud, but enough. "We are not demanding money. We are not chasing headlines. We are demanding change. For Rosie, for every little girl who's ever been made to feel like her presence was an inconvenience." The clip was shared over 2 million times in 48 hours. By the end of the week, Rosie had letters from kids across the country. Some were drawings, colorful crayons, and crooked hearts. One said, "Dear Rosie, I'm sorry the man was mean to you. I would have sat next to you." Another said, "Thank you for staying in the window seat. Now I'm going to sit in mine too." Danielle read every one aloud before taping them onto the wall above Rosie's bed. They didn't have to say brave. They didn't have to say hero. They just said, "I saw you." That weekend, Danielle received a confidential email, anonymous, but it had attachments. It was a copy of a previous incident report involving Captain Brenner, dated from 2 years earlier. A Latina mother traveling alone with a disabled son. The report had been buried, handled internally. The language was eerily similar. Attitude, uncooperative, seat confusion. It had never made the news. There had been no footage then. Danielle forwarded it to Maya with a single line, "Pattern, let's go." Maya replied instantly, "I'll leak it by morning." At a town hall hosted by a youth organization in D.C., Rosie was invited to attend. She wore a light denim jacket over her favorite purple dress, her hair done in 2 simple braids. She didn't speak, just smiled quietly as young girls gathered around her, asking for pictures and hugging her tightly like they'd known her for years. One girl, maybe 8 years old, looked up at her and asked, "How did you not cry?" Rosie blinked. "I wanted to, but my mom was there, so I didn't have to." The girl nodded and hugged her again. Danielle watched from the back of the room, her chest swelling. Not with pride, but something deeper. Confirmation, validation. This had been the right fight. As they drove home that night, Rosie leaned her head against the car window. The city lights flickered across her face like constellations. "Are you glad it happened?" she asked suddenly. Danielle didn't answer right away. She reached over, brushing a hand across Rosie's back. "I'm not glad he hurt you," she said softly. "But I'm glad the world saw what happened. I'm glad you stayed in that seat. And I'm glad they know your name now." Rosie smiled, just a little. "I think I always sit by the window now," she said. Danielle chuckled. "Good. You earned it." Freedom Air had a choice to make. And they were out of time. By Monday morning, Rosie Weaving's name wasn't just trending, it was anchored in the national conversation. Morning shows debated the implications. Editorials used phrases like "racial microaggressions in the sky" and "the Rosa Parks of Row 14." Major publications ran think pieces with titles like "The Price of a Window Seat" and "When a Child Becomes the Mirror." Every few hours, another voice joined the chorus. Celebrities reposted the video, teachers used it as a discussion tool, activists called for accountability. And Rosie, 10 years old, was sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table, cutting the crust off her peanut butter sandwich like she had no idea the world outside was on fire because of her stillness. Danielle scrolled through her inbox. 47 new emails since breakfast, legal offers, press inquiries, a request from a senator's office to bring Rosie to Capitol Hill for a youth equity summit. A public school in Chicago wanted to name their library's reading corner after her. She gently pulled the tablet away from Rosie. "Finish your sandwich." Rosie pouted but obeyed, taking a bite without looking up. A knock came at the door. Martha opened it to reveal a courier in a navy blazer holding a flat envelope. "For Miss Weaving," he said. "Time-sensitive." Danielle signed without flinching. She already knew who it was from. Inside the envelope was a single-page letter. Clean, crisp, expensive stationery. At the top, embossed in silver. Freedom Air Corporate Headquarters. Danielle read it once, then again. They finally named Rosie. "We sincerely apologize to Rosie Weaving and her family for the events on Flight 807. The actions taken were not reflective of our company's values, nor our expectations of employee conduct. We are conducting immediate internal retraining on implicit bias for all senior flight staff and implementing new passenger dignity protocols effective immediately. Danielle folded the letter slowly without speaking. Rosie's eyes widened. Was that from them? Did they say sorry? Danielle nodded. They did. Rosie chewed quietly. Good. But Danielle wasn't smiling. She knew what this really meant. Not just a letter, not just damage control. This was strategy. This was corporate survival. 2 hours later, Danielle sat in a boardroom overlooking the city skyline. Across the table sat 3 senior executives from Freedom Air. One was the VP of Legal Affairs, another was their Chief Diversity Officer, the third, a man with salt and pepper hair and a jaw too tight to appear sincere, was the Senior VP of Operations. He had only spoken once so far, and that was to ask if there was coffee. Danielle had brought Jeanette and Maya. Neither said much. They didn't need to. We're prepared to offer your family a formal settlement, the VP of Legal said, sliding a folder across the table. This includes financial restitution, travel credits, and an invitation for Ms. Weaving to consult on our upcoming diversity initiatives. Danielle didn't touch the folder. Not interested in hush money, she said. We're not here because my daughter needs free flights. We're here because your captain put his bias on display and your company let it sit there for days before acknowledging it. The Chief Diversity Officer cleared her throat. We acknowledge that now, fully, and we intend to do better. Then start by making your apology as public as your silence, Danielle said. Use her name. Use his. Don't hide behind phrases like the incident or passenger experience. Say what happened, say who caused it, and say who didn't back down. The room was quiet. Then the VP of Legal leaned forward. We're prepared to reword the statement and publish it by the end of the day. Danielle finally opened the folder. She skimmed the numbers. Her expression didn't change. This will go into a trust for her education, she said flatly. And the rest? The senior VP asked. Danielle looked up. The rest is yours to carry. The meeting ended without handshakes. Outside the building, reporters waited. Danielle stepped into the sunlight, paused at the podium that had been set up for her, and looked out at the sea of microphones. She hadn't planned to speak again so soon. But some things didn't wait. My daughter, Rosie Weaving, was confronted on a plane for sitting in a seat that was hers. What happened wasn't just about travel. It was about space, about who gets to occupy it freely, about who's questioned when they do. Cameras flashed, birds circled overhead. She didn't yell, she didn't fight. She just stayed where she was meant to be, and the world saw her. Danielle stepped back. The press tried to shout questions, but she walked away without answering. Not everything needed to be explained. Some truths stood on their own. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city, Rosie lay on her bed, headphones on, sketchbook in hand. She drew a window. Not from memory, from feeling. A little girl sat beside it, legs swinging, eyes fixed on something just beyond the clouds. Danielle knocked once, then came in. You okay? She asked. Rosie nodded. I think so. Want to talk about it? Rosie set her pencil down. Not yet. Danielle smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked down at the drawing, then brushed a finger over the corner where Rosie had drawn the initials R.W. 14A. You ready to fly again someday? Danielle asked softly. Rosie turned toward her. Only if I get the window. Danielle kissed her forehead. Always. And somewhere in 1,000 different airports, little girls sat taller in their seats. Because Rosie had. The gate agent smiled as she handed Rosie her boarding pass. You're in 2A, sweetheart. Window seat. Rosie grinned and looked up at her mom, the sparkle in her eyes brighter than it had been in weeks. Danielle gave her a nod. "Go ahead, baby. Lead the way." It was their first flight since Flight 807. Rosie clutched her small purple backpack and walked confidently toward the jet bridge, each step echoing louder than the one before. She wasn't nervous. Not today. Not anymore. The last time she walked this path, it ended with the world finding her. This time, she walked it knowing exactly who she was. Danielle followed behind her at a steady pace. She wasn't watching Rosie to protect her anymore. She was watching to remember this moment. What courage looked like when it didn't need to fight anymore. When they reached the plane door, the pilot stood there, tall and smiling. "Good morning," he said gently, crouching just a bit to Rosie's height. "You must be Miss Weaving." Rosie blinked. "How'd you know?" "Word travels fast," he said with a wink. "Especially when you're a legend." Rosie giggled, hiding behind her mom's coat for half a second before stepping forward again. "Nice to meet you." He extended his hand. "My name's Captain Reynolds. I just wanted to say welcome aboard and thank you." Rosie shook his hand, tiny fingers barely wrapping around his. Captain Reynolds straightened up and turned to Danielle. "And thank you, ma'am, for everything." Danielle offered him a polite smile. "Just making sure the world knows who belongs in every seat." They walked down the aisle. No glares, no whispers, no wait. Just aisle lights and quiet respect. A flight attendant nodded warmly at Rosie and said, "Window's waiting for you." When Rosie slid into 2A, her face lit up. The window was clean, the sun was peeking through, and the world outside looked wide again. Her backpack hit the floor, her book came out, and she was already pressing her forehead against the glass like old times. Danielle settled into the seat beside her. She looked around the cabin. Passengers smiled at them. Real, unforced smiles. Someone even mouthed, "That's her," with a grin. But no one crowded them. There were no phones in their faces, only space, only peace. "I miss this," Rosie whispered. Danielle turned. "Missed what?" "The clouds," she said. "They look like they're waiting for something." Danielle brushed her daughter's braid over her shoulder. "Maybe they're waiting for you." As the plane taxied toward the runway, Rosie's fingers tapped her armrest. "Do you think there'll be more girls like me now, who won't move when someone tells them to?" "I think there already are," Danielle replied. "But now they know they're not alone." The engines roared to life, a deep hum beneath their feet, and Rosie's heart lifted with it. Takeoff no longer felt like fear. It felt like flight, like claiming airspace that was always hers. Back home, Grandmartha was watching the news again. This time, the headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Freedom Air launches Rosie Initiative to combat bias and improve youth passenger experience." The camera cut to footage from a press conference where Freedom Air's CEO addressed a crowd. "This isn't just about one girl," the CEO said. "This is about all the children who deserve to feel safe, seen, and respected on our planes. And it's about the ones who came before her, those who didn't get filmed, who didn't get heard. We're changing that, starting today." Marta wiped the corner of her eye with a tissue and whispered, "You did that, baby?" Letters continued pouring in. Teachers wrote in to say Rosie's story was now part of their curriculum. Authors dedicated books to her. A children's advocacy nonprofit announced an annual Rosie Day, inviting kids across the country to wear purple and write about a time they stood up for themselves. Rosie read every letter. One day she turned to Danielle and asked, "Can I write them back?" Danielle smiled. "Of course. What do you want to say?" Rosie thought for a moment. Then she whispered, "Tell them, thank you for seeing me." That spring, Danielle was invited to speak at a university. The topic, Advocacy Through Grace. She stood in front of hundreds of students, her voice steady, her story clear. But when she mentioned Rosie's name, the room went silent with reverence. She didn't raise her hand to fight, Daniel told them. She just didn't lower her head. Back on the plane, Rosie watched the clouds shift and change, watched them stretch across the sky like they were being pulled just for her. She looked down at the world she had quietly, powerfully shaken, and smiled. The flight attendant passed and leaned toward her. "We've got cookies today. You want one?" Rosie nodded. "Yes, please." Danielle turned to her. "You're going to spoil your dinner." Rosie grinned. "Worth it." As the plane cruised above the world that once tried to shrink her, Rosie looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in gold and pink and orange. It didn't feel small anymore. It felt open, big enough to hold her story, big enough to hold all of them. And in that quiet, suspended place above the world, Rosie Weaving finally felt it. Not just peace, not just justice, hunting joy. Because sometimes the bravest thing a girl can do is stay seated. And sometimes that's how she learns to fly.